Coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast.
How is the monkey?
The monkey's very, very well, thank you.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best guest gossip, news and stories from our studios here at GB News in the heart of Westminster. This week, the government finally set out its plans to tackle one of the top three difficult issues in its in-tray: soaring illegal and legal migration. It published a new immigration white paper which will become a law. It's the fourth such immigration legislation in 10 years, and all have failed to cut numbers arriving here. A point I put to Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, at a breakfast time press conference on Monday.
So, GB News. Prime Minister, we've been here before, haven't we? There have been three immigration acts since 2014. The Immigration Act in 2014 and 2016 both aimed to reduce immigration. They both failed. Why on earth should GB News viewers think you're going to succeed? And why not give us a promise right now? Why not give us a fixed target right now, not a promise, so we can judge you on success? The Tories at least did that, but they failed.
Well, look, the difference here, this is the most comprehensive plan that has been put forward. It's been forward to end the Tory sort of wide open borders experiment that we have had. You're right about that. And it looks at all routes, and it's comprehensive. And it does the hard yards of linking skills and business to what we need to do with the economy. So it's not a narrow look just at the numbers. It puts them in their proper context. On the question, which we do want to significantly reduce migration, I'm absolutely making clear that's what it will do, and that if we need to go further, we will. So that's the promise I make to your viewers. I don't think it's sensible to put a hard-edged cap on it. That has been done in one form or another for the best part of 10 years by different prime ministers. The only thing that links those prime ministers and the various caps or quotas or limits they put in place is every single one of them failed. And therefore, going down the failed route is not a sensible way for me. As with everything that I do, serious, pragmatic, looking at the things that will actually make a material difference.
As you heard there, Sir Keir Starmer refused to put a target on his plans so we could judge how successful he is on controlling migration. Clearly aware, possibly, that the Tories never got close to their target of cutting it to under 100,000 a year net arrivals. So I tried again, this time with the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, in the Home Office a few hours later, also on Monday.
Where will we be on net migration by the end of the Parliament? Below 500,000 a year?
Well, we're clear it needs to be substantially down. So that's certainly the case.
Is that where you'll be, 500,000?
No, it needs to be substantially down.
So below that?
It needs to be
below
substantially down. So we absolutely needs to be substantially down. I mean, you've heard, I think your first question shows we have had a whole series of targets that the Tories set out previously. Yeah. None of them were met. In fact, they often did the opposite. So I think that just undermined the credibility of the whole system. So that's why we are taking a different approach to this. The way we're doing things is setting out step by step the action that we'll take.
Exactly.
People will be able to see the consequences. They'll be able to see the progress that we're making, but we'll do that step by step rather than just going for rhetoric and saying things that nobody's going to believe.
But I say 500,000 and you didn't deny that.
It's going to be substantially down.
Below that?
It needs to be substantially down.
But maybe around 500,000 net arrivals every year. But will that make any difference and convince voters this government is serious about controlling migration? So Keir Starmer also used that speech on breakfast time on Monday morning to lay down some home truths about his views on immigration. He said this:
Nations depend on rules, fair rules. Sometimes they're written down, often they're not. But either way, they give shape to our values. Without them, we risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together.
Now that language I've never heard from a Labour Prime Minister. I've rarely heard it from a Tory Prime Minister. It could have come straight from the mouths of a leadership of Reform UK and infuriated left-wing Labour MPs who compared the remarks to remarks made by the late Enoch Powell, that Tory minister whose rivers of blood speech warning on mass migration made him a political pariah for decades. And not everyone believed what Sir Keir Starmer said. Kemi Badenoch spoke to me for GB News on Tuesday evening. Here's what she had to say. And Kemi Badenoch, of course, we're speaking in a big week for the government resetting its immigration plans. Now, the PM has said we're risk becoming an island of strangers and forces are slowly pulling this country apart. Do you believe he means that when he says it? It's different language than we've ever heard from before.
No, I bet someone else wrote that for him. The Prime Minister is taking the public for fools. This is a man who fought for free movement. He thinks that all immigration is racist, is something that he said many years ago. But the fact is, it's not what he says, it's what he does. Yesterday, we had votes on some of the very things that he says he wants to do. What did the Labour Party do? They voted against them. They voted on the measures that we're putting in, making it harder for asylum seekers to get British citizenship. They voted against that. And then they say that they have these proposals which they're going to put in a report. They're just kicking it into the long grass. I don't believe them at all.
Now, with me on Chopper's Political Podcast, I'll be talking later to a Red Wall Labour MP, Jonathan Brash, to find out what he thought of the PM's comments and indeed the plans to curb immigration. And also later we're talking to Suella Braverman, a former Conservative Home Secretary, to ask why is it that politicians' rhetoric so often fails to match up to action on tackling immigration. But first, in the wake of those remarks from Sir Keir Starmer in Downing Street, I wanted to hear more from him personally on why he said them and if he meant them. So I headed to Albania for GB News, where the PM is meeting with dozens of European leaders and a session of the European political community. And here's what Sir Keir Starmer told me there. In 2020, you said you want to make a wider case for immigration, make the case for the benefits of migration. How can GB News viewers believe you when you say you're concerned about it now?
Well, I've always said that our country should be able to walk forward into the future in a way which is bringing our communities together, our neighbours together. And that's why I'm clear that we shouldn't be an island of strangers. Actually, the way forward for our country is to go forward as one country facing the challenges of the future, as neighbours, as communities, but not as strangers. And my fear is that the, frankly, loss of control over the last 4 years by the last government, with the massive increase in the number of net migration up to nearly 1 million, that's quadrupled in 4 years. That is an incredible loss of control by the government. I think it's really important that we now take firm, effective action to bring those numbers down, which is why we published our white paper, which covers all aspects of
the language there
and takes back control of our borders.
Your language on strangers, island of strangers, was language, some say, used by Enoch Powell. So how do you respond to the left-wing MPs saying you're adopting Powell-like language, a dog whistle almost?
Well, that's a complete nonsense. My values are about how we bring our country together. I've always believed in the patriotism that Labour has long embodied as a political party. We are proud of our country. We take our country forward. We do that by bringing our neighbours together, by being neighbours and being a community, not by being strangers. That is a strong Labour value. It's a patriotic value. We are a country which is diverse. I celebrate that, where migrants coming to our country have added a huge contribution and changed our country for the better. But we do that as friends, as colleagues, as neighbours and a community. And a country has to move forward. And I want to lead a country that's moving forward, facing up to the challenges of the future. And that's why I'm concerned that the last 4 years under the last government have risked us becoming an island of strangers.
Sir Keir Starmer there talking to me in Albania. What do backbench Labour MPs make of all this, particularly those who might be feeling the hot breath of Reform UK in their constituencies, exploiting the government's failure by the Tory and possibly Labour to tackle legal or illegal migration flows? With me now is Jonathan Brash, the Labour MP for Hartlepool. Jonathan, great to see you here for the first time on Chopper's Political Podcast. Were you surprised to hear your leader talking about how we risk becoming an island of strangers and that forces are slowly pulling our country apart? This is not what a Labour PM has ever said before.
Well, I think it's a recognition of the fact that we're not in normal times when it comes to immigration, whether it's legal or illegal. You know, since 2016, we have seen unprecedented levels of both. You know, we've been in a time when there was 700,000 net increase in migration every year. The small boats crisis is completely out of control. The Prime Minister, nor anyone else in the Labour Party, is arguing that immigration hasn't been a good thing for the United Kingdom, but it's got to be integrated, and it's at such a pace now and at such a speed. I think this is what he was trying to say, that it's potentially overwhelming some communities in our country. The change is so fast and it's impossible to adapt to it. The numbers are too high, and I've said during the general election and ever since, numbers are too high. Illegal immigration, both.
And as your voters demand you to say that, they want you to reflect their reality.
Well, I mean, clearly this is correct, and certainly my constituents believe that immigration is too high. But I've been very consistent that, with legal immigration, I think the real thing we've got to focus on is why are we living in a country where so many people are economically out of the loop, they're out of society, they're not in work, and instead of training them with the skills that we need to do the jobs that we need, we're importing from abroad. Now, I said way before the general election, we need to stop importing and start innovating. That means funding skills properly. It means getting money into our colleges. We're importing construction workers into this country. I've got an FE college in my constituency that trains construction workers and had its funding cut by the last government. It's not hard to square that circle.
It does seem crazy. Was you right to make those remarks? The left are saying it's a bit like what Enoch Powell would say.
I think those comparisons are totally bogus, and I think
they allow critics not to look at the substance, merely attack the man.
I mean, I think and playing the man, not the ball, is sort of the worst aspect of politics in the modern day. I think. Look, he was just because he used similar words to another politician doesn't mean the meaning was the same, and the meaning clearly wasn't the same. He was talking about the fact that if immigration is too far, too fast, too high, you struggle to integrate into the communities in which they come. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable perspective.
I think critics don't get it. So you have to get it because you're living in Hartlepool, you're representing people there. But the critics maybe aren't seeing their neighbourhoods overwhelmed, as you say, by migrants. They're all changing quickly and no one's controlling it. Do you think it's easier for critics who aren't seeing it?
Well, I think people should spend time in working class communities because it's not just about immigrants coming to those areas. It's about jobs and opportunities. We've gone through 15 years where towns like Hartlepool have felt left behind. They've lost their accident emergency. They've lost their police station fully open. They've lost their magistrates' court. They don't feel that sense of pride and place that they deserve to feel. And so they turn around and they're angry about it. They're angry about a political system that's left them behind. And I would argue
that hasn't happened.
Oh, well, it hasn't. I mean, the interesting thing about Boris Johnson is he got the diagnosis absolutely correct, but the treatment completely wrong. Levelling up is not about, building a nice bridge or a shopping centre or making a hotel look pretty or whatever. It's about actually fundamentally shifting our economy into parts of our country so they can control their own destiny. They've got the jobs, they've got the infrastructure. People in Hartlepool remember the fact we used to be the third largest port in this country. Yeah. We were a part of the engine room of the British economy, and we've lost that, and that's what we have to get back. And once you shift the economic levers back into working class communities, reindustrialize this country, then we can have that pride and place, and the anger that people feel about what's happened to them will dissipate.
And Pat McFadden, the Cabinet Office Minister, they're moving out, aren't they, civil servant roles to other areas. When I've been travelling around for GPs, I am struck by how many people say, why is money being spent by the Labour government in the south? On Oxford Cambridge line, Luton Gatwick, Heathrow expansion. Why is that happening? Often, I think, perhaps you can help me with this, it's the Treasury Green Book. They look at how the best value, best investment you get for a return is in the south of England, and that means money is spent down here.
I mean, I'm a huge critic of the Treasury position on this and the Treasury Green Book. It's very, very easy.
What is the Green Book, briefly?
So the Green Book is the set of rules that government uses to decide where they put money, and it is a reality. We should be absolutely clear about this. It is easier to get GDP growth by pouring money to places where the ground is already fertile, where you've already got the infrastructure, where you've already got the skilled workforce waiting. That's true, but that puts the cost of everything over the value of everything. And the value of investing in northern post-industrial heartlands is that you will lift up those communities and level up the country in a real way. And that's what we have to do. So, I mean, the Treasury... the reality of civil service Treasury orthodoxy is that I think for far too long, they look at the idea of going back to the point of immigration, shall we train a British person in the skills we need, which is expensive, or shall we import those skills from abroad, which is cheap? And they've chosen the latter, and that's wrong.
And that is the challenge. We're talking to Suella Braverman on this podcast about why she used language and to try and tackle immigration. People applauded that, and then it hasn't happened. And I wonder whether this might run into the sand because of the Treasury again saying economic growth matters. I'm afraid to say cheap labour coming in will boost GDP. That's what we have to do.
Well, I think ministers have announced a review of the Green Book because I think they recognise this problem. And I think what I would say to any Conservative, criticism is a bit rich, frankly. And we have to push beyond the words, which was partly their problem, but it was all words and no actual action. We have to have action on this. We have to invest in those communities because, take the big debate this week about care workers, for example, and the worries that the care sector has. Well, in my constituency, we've got Health and Social Care Academy. We've set it up to train people locally in the care sector so that we've got those jobs ready to go from our own community. So we don't have to import people from abroad to do that.
And salaries must go up.
And salaries must go up. And by the way, we've legislated for fair pay agreements in the care sector to push those wages up. And I'm sorry to say the Conservatives and Reform voted against doing that. So, getting salaries up and getting British people into those jobs is the right way to tackle immigration.
Rwanda. Now, Rwanda, of course, is a trigger word for a lot of people, maybe in the Labour movement. The Tories thought they could deport people arriving here. There was early evidence, it was anecdotal evidence, it was stopping people coming across from the south, from across the southern border from France, pushing people into Southern Ireland from Northern Ireland. I personally think it is probably a mistake to write it off without a 6-month trial because it may have worked, but...
I think the thing with Rwanda was, let's not forget that it was, part of Operation Save Big Dog. It was decided. It was.
Don't play the man. Stop.
No. The reality is, it was a policy designed to try and get the Prime Minister of the day over a hole.
Listeners think, why not give it a chance? I think everyone wants you guys to succeed in controlling migration and helping this country. That's what we all want to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why not?
Well, here's the fundamental thing I think about the solve. I would say the fiction that the Tories are peddling, that Rwanda would have worked if you'd just given us a bit more time. They called the early general election. Yes. If they thought Rwanda was suddenly going to start working, I think they would have held on a little bit longer, and they didn't because they knew it wasn't going to work.
You think so? Yeah, maybe so. Reform, they're challenging you, are they, locally?
Of course, yeah. No, Reform are...
Is they're the oppo you're worrying about more than Labour?
The
Tories.
I think the Conservative Party is a busted flush in many parts of the country, certainly in my constituency. Yeah, of course, Reform are working very hard. And I think whenever you have dissatisfaction, and that clearly exists in the moment, people are going to look elsewhere. So our job over the next 4 years is to challenge that dissatisfaction, is to deliver for the people in Hartlepool, to deliver those jobs, to deliver that improvement so that they recognise that they're better off with Labour.
And make them show they're a government in waiting. The thing with Reform is there's 5 MPs.
Yeah.
We haven't got a shadow Home Secretary,
No.
a shadow Chancellor, shadow Health, shadow anything. They've got one guy plus 4 other colleagues who help him. I think they are not a government in waiting, but they're 10 points ahead of Labour in the polls at some point.
I think what you'll see over the next 4 years is people are going to be challenging much more yourself and other people in the media.
We do, and I do.
I'm sure you do, because if they want to be a government in waiting, they're going to have to come up with the answers to a lot of these questions. And I think what I see from the Reform Party at the moment is a lot of slogans. They badge everything 2-tier and call it a policy. And what I don't see is the detail yet. And I think that's what's going to have to come out over the next few years if they're going to be considered a serious threat. Otherwise, they'll fade into the background.
You're part of this group called Blue Labour.
Yes.
What is it? How many are in it? Why is Labour blue?
So the blue in this refers to blue collar and about representing working class communities that we feel, sort of the liberal London lefty elite have kind of abandoned over a number of years. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about recognising the needs of those communities, recognising that those communities built this country, that they were the engines of our economic growth, and that they shouldn't have been left behind. They have been, and we've got to stop that.
And how many are in it?
There's a good dozen of us. I'll leave it to them to reveal themselves.
Who is he? It seems the guy called Morgan McSweeney, who no one needs to know who he is, but he's very important to the government.
Yeah.
He's a low star, I think, for a lot of the policy coming out of it. He was quite closely aligned to Lord Glassman, who we have on the podcast before.
Yeah.
who does talk this kind of clear language on Labour values, I think. Yeah, clearer than a lot of Labour MPs, not you, but other people.
I think it's very clear that what we want to put forward and what we want the government to adopt is policies that put our working class communities, our post-industrial heartlands first, that recognise that we have to invest in those areas, that we have to create those jobs, that has to recognise the concerns that those voters have. We are very clear, worrying about immigration does not in any way, shape or form make you right-wing and or racist. It's a perfectly legitimate concern. It's something that has to be addressed. We're just very straight talking, and I think that's what we want to push the government to adopt.
And just finally, your message then to critics on the left criticising your leader Keir Starmer for those remarks. What would you say back to them?
Look, I think if you become obsessed with the words, you're probably in a hiding to nothing. I think focus on the actions. If anyone wants to say that the public aren't concerned about the level of immigration, if anyone wants to argue that immigration is not too high, I invite them to do so. They're wrong. And I think that at the end of the day, we need to tackle this problem with actions. Focusing on the words isn't helpful.
Jonathan Brash, I haven't asked you about Hangus the monkey, have I?
You haven't so far.
How is the monkey?
The monkey's very, very well fed.
Explain to listeners about Hangus briefly.
So the legend of the monkey is that a monkey washed up on Hartlepool beach during the Napoleonic Wars, and the belief was that it was a French spy, and so he was hanged. And he's become the mascot of our town, not least our football club and everything else, ever since. So we're very proud of Hangus, yes.
And is there a monkey now?
Well, our mascot at the football club is, of course, Hangus the monkey. We're season ticket holders in my family, so my children have been photographed with Hangus many times.
I was going to say, one of the brilliant producers here, Rebecca Nunes, who is Spanish, is going, ¿Qué?
Well,
what are you talking about? We'll have to explain to you.
Well, Hartlepool football culture is far superior to Spanish football culture, is all I'll say.
But that's not the whole story, is it, Jonathan Brash? Because Hangus the monkey at some point ran for mayor and won.
He did. My good friend Stuart Drummond was Hangus the monkey for many years, and he did run for mayor. And
dressed as the monkey?
He ran dressed as the monkey. He took the monkey suit off when he became mayor, I have to say. Sure. And I was in his cabinet for a while, to be perfectly honest. So I
eating bananas. What are you doing?
I was not feeding him bananas. He's a very nice man. He endorsed me to be the member of Parliament, so I'm very grateful to him. But
it's a protest.
It was, but I think it's really important to recognise that he won twice more after that. So he was obviously well liked by the people of Hartlepool, and rightly so.
Jonathan Brash, thank you very much for joining us again.
No problem. Thank you.
Now, why do tough talking on migration so often fail to live up to reality? What are the forces in government stopping ministers from clamping down on immigration, even when they say they want to? And does all this remarks, this tough language from Sir Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper this week to GB News, mean that these plans, while well meant, are doomed to fail? With me now is a former Conservative Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who experienced at first hand the challenges, the difficulties of trying to cut migration. Thanks for joining us today in resplendent, in GB News blue, I think I want to call that, in our studio. For those who can't see, it's a beautiful blue suit with a white chevrolet. So excellent to see you here in our studios at GB News. Why is it so hard for someone in your job to bring down migration, given you had a decade of trying to do it and you failed in your government, and now we've got the Labour lot trying to do it?
Well, I've asked myself that very question many times, Christopher. It's actually almost 2 years ago, exactly to the month and day, in May 2023, when I was Home Secretary, and I was in the midst of this policy battle with my own cabinet colleagues.
On Rwanda, was that?
No, this is on legal migration.
Right.
This is on trying to get the numbers down. I came into the Home Office in the autumn of 2022, and the numbers were out of control. The previous June, they had topped, the number of visas that we had issued had exceeded 1 million for the first time. And I went in...
Calendar year.
Exactly, between 2021 to 2022.
A 12-month period, yeah.
Exactly. And that was the alarm bell for me. I went in later that autumn with a plan, and I said to both Liz and Rishi, we might be able to turn this around. We've got enough time. If you give me the green light, I've got the plan to go to get these numbers down and turn the tide. We could raise the salary threshold. We've got to scrap the graduate visa route, which is a massive incentive for foreign students, which had exponentially risen in a matter of 2 or 3 years.
Because you're aware of the pledge in your manifesto. That's why you were doing it, because you were voted on
Exactly.
that pledge to bring it down, your government was 4 times over the past decade or so.
Yeah, I was just going by the what we'd promised in our manifesto, what Brexit was about. I thought everyone had signed up to our manifesto, more for me.
Including the Prime Minister, by the way,
Unfortunately,
who wrote it.
Right. Unfortunately, I was met with a barrage of opposition.
So yeah, that's what I'm interested in because you hear this language from Keir Starmer this week about this division on the islands. He's talking the language of maybe the Conservatives and certainly Reform UK. But so often we see strong language, and you were the same when you were the Home Secretary. We spoke again frequently about this area. You talked a big game. And then the output was really, really depressingly bad. And what caused that? Is it always the Treasury? Is it the Environment Department wanting more people to pick fruit in the fields? Is it the NHS wanting nurses?
It's a combination of two things. So firstly, and primarily, it was a lack of political will. I just couldn't get the Prime Minister's support on this issue. And the Treasury didn't want to cut immigration. The Prime Minister didn't want to cut
because of economic growth.
Exactly. They all believed that more immigrants, more workers into the country and students into the country would necessarily be a good thing for economic growth. And that was the constant rebuttal that I got from my cabinet colleagues. And all other departments, I'm afraid, took the same view: education, health, environment and rural
and
affairs.
they made pitches outside of the Home Office, so you weren't probably aware that you're trying to do this, but there's pitches or was it all going through you?
Well, I went to my cabinet colleagues to try and reach common ground. I very much understood where they were coming from, and I thought we could try and find, with a bit of give and take, a mutual agreement. That wasn't really possible, and so there was a lack of political will, and I was a real, I didn't fit into that cabinet in many ways, and the battle on legal migration really exemplified that. The second main obstacle was the Office for Budget Responsibility, which loomed very heavily over all cabinet decisions.
With its forecast on net migration being 300,000 or so, and on that hinges forecast growth and therefore the success or not failure of the government.
Yeah.
That's the big picture.
And the OBR was wedded to a really wrong-headed view, in my opinion, that again more immigration into the country would lead to greater GDP, and absurdly they thought it would increase GDP per capita. I mean, that's the key metric. How does each individual in the country feel? Exactly. And of course, the greater your population size, and without sufficient economic growth, you're going to get a fall in GDP per capita, which we have had. The OBR also obstinately refused to take into account the costs of low-skilled, low-wage migration. So they wouldn't want to take into their calculations the cost of the use of services.
It's rather amazing hearing Keir Starmer address that point and say
absolutely.
A big boost in migration hasn't grown the economy. So he's arguing now against that orthodoxy.
Yes,
and that's quite interesting.
I'm available, Keir Starmer, if you want any more tips on how to build that argument. But listen, he's absolutely right on that point. It doesn't lead to economic growth because of the costs. The costs in terms of using public services, GPs, school places, the pressure on house prices and rentals. Rents, and of course the long-term costs in terms of people claiming social security.
Yeah,
I would say, and it's been backed up by studies, that the level of low-skilled, low-wage migration that we have is a net cost to the UK rather than net benefit.
So we are where we are, and can this work? You've got your 3-point plan to stop mass migration once and for all. Briefly, what is that again? Your idea?
First of all, we've got to scrap the graduate visa route. So that was introduced by the Conservatives under Boris, and that basically says that any foreign student who comes into the UK, upon completion of their course, can get 2 years free afterwards, and they don't have to work, they don't have to study, they don't have to do anything, and they can kind of enjoy London, enjoy some of our big cities. Some of them do work and they send money back, but it's a massive incentive to pull foreign students into the UK because they want that time, that extra time afterwards. And I don't think that is helping our economy. And it has increased. It's a big factor for the massive and exponential increase in foreign students. We set a target in 2019 of 300,000 students by the end of the decade. We reached 500,000 in a matter of 3 years.
By suppressing student loans or that maybe be part of the problem.
Yeah, I think that is. So universities are running a really flawed business model. Many of them are basically being kept afloat because of foreign money from foreign students, because they pay higher fees.
Yes.
And on the back of that income, they run quite substandard courses. So you'll get, not a very good university opening the East London campus, and that ends up being, above a shop and not very, reputable. Yes. And they run Mickey Mouse courses. And this whole cycle, this business model is, and those Mickey Mouse courses are corroding our country. And so,
Ponzi scheme, isn't it?
I think it is. It absolutely is. There's also a lot of abuse. Yeah. So a lot of these foreign students come, they don't bother attending, and the universities don't monitor whether people are attending.
Entire cohort of 18-year-olds suddenly said, we're not going to university. The thing will collapse. It relies on more money coming in the bottom, whilst all this ends.
Yes, I agree.
That's why.
I mean, I think so. The argument that would come back to me is, well, some universities would go under
if
we turn the tap off international students. I would say that's not a bad thing.
No.
We've actually got too much higher education. We need more vocational training. Yeah. We need more quality courses on offer. So I would scrap that route, which has been the big reason why the number of foreign students has got out of control. Yeah. I would secondly raise the salary threshold significantly. Again, I'm afraid the Conservative government under Boris cut the salary threshold, which again was a capitalist
way, wasn't it?
There was a Boris way.
And I say it on air on GB News, and I get told off by viewers, but there was a Boris way.
We promised to cut overall numbers in the 2019 general election. We did anything but. And in the year between June 2021 and June 22 and June 23, the number of net migration was 900,000, almost 1 million. It's unacceptable. So if we raise the salary threshold to more, a level like the average salary or exceeding it, that would
30,000.
Yeah, I would go further. Personally, I would say 40,000 at least.
Yeah.
Because that would reduce the number of low-wage migrants coming in.
Your third point?
And the third one would be dependence.
Yes, of course.
The kind of hidden challenge here is that, again, the rules were loosened a few years ago, and what we saw almost immediately was students and workers bringing in, on average, 2 dependents, even if they were intended to stay here temporarily.
A
parent and a partner, and in some cases even more, imposing cost on our services. I would dramatically reduce that. There is no good reason why someone coming to study, on an undergraduate course at a university should need to bring their family.
So you've seen what Labour's doing. They're going to cut 100,000 visas a year, they hope, by the end of this Parliament, but that won't touch the size of where they need to be.
The most recent data last year was, we'll get new stats out at the end of
next week. Thursday next week.
This time last year, the number was 700,000. Yeah. So this is, out of control.
When you heard, though, Keir Starmer saying things like we're going to be fast becoming an island of strangers, or we risk becoming one, and that forces are slowly pulling this country apart, that is language you would say comfortably on GB News. You've been saying it for a while now, but to hear a Labour Prime Minister is interesting. A wake-up call.
Well, they say imitation's the best form of flattery. Maybe I should take the credit for... Maybe he's secretly reading my speeches. Who knows?
I've no doubt.
I'm sure he is. He knows them verbatim. Listen, the observation is the right one that he's made, and for it to come from a socialist prime minister, I think, is telling. It's obviously in response to the drubbing that they received at the local elections and the threat from reform. That's what this is all about.
Seems that way.
But the fact that he said it and he's been able to articulate it, even in the face of backlash from his more left-wing colleagues in Parliament, I think is good. However, we've been round this block before. Tony Blair made a very similar speech kind of in the early 2000s saying that if you come to this country, you need to learn English. David Cameron said multiculturalism had failed. This is a broken record.
The beneficiary of the mismatch between output and language, which you're describing there vividly, the beneficiary of that is Nigel Farage. Now, he is saying 1 in, 1 out net migration works. And I said to him on air, what about if the fruit is rotting in the fields? What about if we can't, old people can't have their pads changed because there's no carers anymore? He says, it's fine before 2002, we'll get past it, He's saying this kind of stuff, and it's attracting votes.
Well, I think it's generally the right idea because the problem is so out of control. And
so it needs to shock the system, maybe.
I think we do need... I think it has to be... it does have to be measured because we do need to meet the needs of our labour market. So the one side of the coin is cutting net migration in the way that I've set out for starters. The other side of the coin is reforming welfare because there are millions of Brits. There's a record number of Brits on long-term sick who are on out-of-work welfare who could be eminently able to do some of these jobs if they were paid more and if it was harder for them to stay at home.
Make it worth their while.
So welfare and skilling up needs to be part of the solution. You can't do one without the other.
And that's the battle of this autumn, going into this budget, no question.
Yeah.
Briefly, we are broadcasting on the eve of a big Brexit splurge. The European Political Community, I think it's called, the EPC. I'm going to be there, so I must find out what it's called. But it's meeting in Albania on Friday. That's bigger than the EU. It's about security issues and the like. And
it was Macron's
idea.
Yeah.
But next week, Monday, we're seeing this summit between Keir Starmer and Ursula von der Leyen, who's the European Union president. A deal will be done. It looks like fish might be traded away, access to waters in return for something else, maybe a defence pact with the continent. Is fish overblown? I know it symbolically matters to Brexiteers, and you're a former head of the chair of the European Research Group of Tory MPs, but do we put too much meaning into fish?
No, I don't think we do, because, listen, I represent a coastal community. I've met some of the bass fishermen down in the Solent, and they were decimated by the common fisheries policy, and they found it incredibly hard by the old EU regime. And many people in the fishing sector voted to leave the European Union precisely because of the CFP. Looking at where we are now, it hasn't really worked. In terms of Barnier's deal that he secured, some EU vessels can access, in some cases and in some areas, about 75% of our fishing stocks around British waters, in British waters. And that deal, that arrangement, expires in 2026. Now, if that expires and nothing replaces it, there'll be an annual haggle between the UK and the EU about what quota we will allow mainly French fishing vessels.
Which they won't like. They want certainty.
They want certainty, and they want a large share. And I do think we have to hold out, because we're a maritime nation. We're a fishing nation.
We build our own fleets.
Exactly.
That was the promise of Brexit.
Exactly. That we should resurrect and restore and see a renaissance in our fishing sector.
You're saying, yeah, but fishing. But if I trade away some fishing rights, I get a good deal for farmer, phytosanitary, whatever it might be. Lots of ways.
Bad deal.
Okay.
Defence. I think we don't need a defence and security. That's exactly what NATO's job is. So I think it has a risk of undermining the viability of NATO, and I think it's undermining our sovereignty, because it is, it's laying the pathway for an EU army, for us losing a bit of control. Yes, we can have dialogue. We don't need a whole structure and a deal to, talk to friends.
You're watching closely. For me, Brexit is about sovereignty.
Yep.
Brexit is about freedom of movement. That might be eaten away by under 18 to 30s, watching that one closely.
Yes.
And of course, in the Customs Union and Single Market, which is what we're told, that's their triple lock on Brexit, according to the government. But that's really important. I mean, doesn't Brexit, it gives the power to elected MPs like yourself to interpret as they see fit? Aren't Labour allowed that right? Or do you think is it like Moses, is written in stone by Bill Cash somewhere?
Yeah, he's our Brexit Moses. Although, no offence to anyone who...
You wouldn't mind that, though.
Yeah, he wouldn't, exactly. Listen, I think that we need to have some basic frameworks about what Brexit means. It can't mean one thing to one person and different thing. I mean, that's part of the problem why we had the crisis.
Yes,
Brexit meant Brexit for several years, and that was a disaster. So I think we have to have common agreement on the substance of what Brexit means, and those red lines are the right ones. But, there's a lot of mischief that the government can get up to even underneath those red lines or within those red lines. And I think the youth mobility is, a beginning of the Brexit betrayal, and could erode what we regained from ending free movement. Dynamic alignment. That is a big...
That means being a rule taker, not a rule maker.
A big, problem. And it's, very technical and doesn't make you get the headlines.
It's a Swiss model.
Exactly.
You sign up to a deal, to rules that you can't change because you're not a rule.
And it means that when the EU changes their rules, we would have to change ours. Again, removing one of the big prizes of Brexit, which was regulatory freedom. If Keir Starmer really believed in Brexit, he would veto and under no circumstances accept dynamic alignment. I'm very worried that he will concede that.
Governing by fax in the old money. Don't that governing? Yeah. You're saying you receive a fax, so we got orders from Brussels.
Yes.
If you're outside the
European Union. We're bringing that back. We're bringing that back under dynamic alignment. And then, ultimately, regulations, sovereignty, as you say, there mustn't be any role for the ECJ. And that also means EU law. And again, there's Article 4, the withdrawal agreement says that we shouldn't be subject to EU supremacy, general principles of EU law, direct effect, all of the the kind of acquis communautaire. None of that applies in the UK, and the jurisprudence for the ECJ. That's what we fought for. That's what we fought for in 2016. I say as a campaigner, I'm one of those 28 who held out. Because to vote against Theresa May's Brexit betrayal deal. And that was the hardest day of my political career. That can't have been in vain if Keir Starmer goes and sells it all.
Well, you never around the Brexit department, and you got, I mean, if I can say it now, you got emotional about it.
I did.
Because you phoned me up in tears.
Yeah, because it was going awry, and it was, the project of regaining control was being ruined.
Because Brexit, it has to be an opportunity, not a problem to be mitigated. And it's just turning into... how can we grasp it? That's what Boris Johnson grasped, I think.
Yeah.
Despite all his weaknesses, he understood
I think
the need to grasp it.
Absolutely. And how do we entrench those opportunities? The trade deals, let me be positive about our record. The trade deal, over 70 trade deals that we signed, CPTPP being the biggest, does make Brexit irreversible to a degree. We won't be able to remember CPTPP if we're joining the customs union, for example. So there becomes a mutually exclusive choice. But we could have gone further, and we should be going further on making the most of regulatory freedoms. There's so much EU law that still applies in the UK, which is a burden on business, which is a burden on our economy. There's a great prize there.
Project Bleach,
exactly.
That was when.
And what I'd really like to see,
removing in words EU.
That was the terminology. Unfortunately, didn't really go as far. But what I'd really like to see, if Keir Starmer is the great kind of international statesman that he's trying to be at the moment, and our relationship has been reset with the EU, is a deal on illegal migration. Now that is something I would support.
With Brussels or with individual countries?
Well, listen, the French, I constantly ask my French counterparts, let's get a deal going. This is a win-win because your northern France region is being ruined by the illegal migration problem. If they couldn't get to the UK, they wouldn't come to the Pas-de-Calais region, which is ruining your agriculture, your hospitality. Let's work together. And they would say, well, we can't make a decision. It's EU.
Brussels must do it.
So on that logic, if the EU and the UK were to strike a deal whereby the EU said, OK, we like Keir Starmer. He was a Remainer. He campaigned for a secular referendum. He's one of us. Let's be nice to him. They could say, OK, we'll intercept the boats on French beaches and we'll turn them around and we'll take them back to French ports. And we will stop the flow of illegal migration into the UK. That would be a win-win. Because the French and the EU would win. We would have to pay a price. I'm sure we are
paying already a lot of money.
We're already paying. I'm sure there'd be a price tag to it. But I think this is a crisis. A price tag would be justified. That would be a real prize. And secondly, if there was something on Northern Ireland, because the Windsor Framework, combined with the protocol, has effectively erected a border down the Irish Sea and created a two-tier system when it comes to trade within the United Kingdom, which is, a grave shame, and it's undermining the union. And if he were to get something on
the wins,
illegal migration and fixing the Northern Ireland issue, then I would contribute Med to support the deal.
I've got one last question. Great to see you, and it's an easy one, really. Are you going to join Reform UK? You're laughing.
Everyone keeps asking me this question. Why is this? Listen. I've been a Conservative Party member.
I know.
I'm 45 now, and I have been. I think I was 15 when I joined. What does that make it? 30 years that I've been a member. My mum's a member. My dad's a member. My family's a member. Listen, I've been just elected as a Conservative Party MP by the great people of Fareham Waterloo. Well, it's a great honour. It's a great honour to be in Parliament. I'll be voting against Keir Starmer's Brexit betrayal today with my Conservative colleagues in the lobby, with wearing the blue rosette.
Okay, no, not a no though, but I guess it's life's a journey. Right, Solid Braverman, it's great to have you on. As you're shaking your head, Chopper's political podcast once again.
As always.
Also earlier, thank you to Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, of course, and Labour MP for Hartlepool, Jonathan Brash. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X. Do tweet me, tell me how much you enjoy or don't enjoy the podcast. It's fine by me, but please keep listening, of course. Email me, chopper@gbnews.uk. If you've enjoyed the podcast, I hope you have, please do tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That helps other people to find it. Thanks to the brilliant team of GB News colleagues behind the podcast. Mick Booker and Jeff Marsh, the overlords of the podcast back in Paddington, and the podcast worker bees here in Westminster, Rebecca Nunes and George McMillan. They do all the hard work and rarely get out to see the light of day and gather pollen and nourish them themselves, but we thank them for their hard work. Most of all, thank you for listening wherever you are. If you want more Chopper in your life, and they certainly don't, do catch me during the week on GB News with all your latest political updates, interviews, stories, and all the rest. And keep up to date with our best reporting on our website, gbnews.com. Until next time, I'm going to buzz off. Cheerio!